In 1917, a small group of believers began gathering for prayer meetings held in their homes, very much like the first century church describes in the book of Acts. They began baptizing people in the Potomac River and realized that God was doing something amazing in their midst. Soon the group grew into a small congregation, and a need for a building was imminent. God began to open new doors for this small congregation as they began to rent out the old Presbyterian meeting house in downtown Alexandria. The Presbyterian Church had discontinued regular services and was willing to rent the facilities to the small congregation. Renting for $10 a month, this facility provided enough space to hold revival meetings, paving the way for rapid future growth. And growth was exactly what happened. In 1922, the church outgrew the property at the Presbyterian Church and acquired new property at the corner of King Street in Washington. Just 2 short years later, God brought incredible growth and the church moved once again. In 1924, the church moved to 1004 King Street. By this time, the small congregation had chosen a new name for their church, the Upper Room Assembly of God. It was in this location that the congregation officially became a part of the fellowship of the Assemblies of God. On February 1st, 1925, General Superintendent J.W. Welch came to officially commission the church. This was a giant step in stabilizing the young congregation, so much in fact that they moved yet once again. In 1929, the Upper Room Assembly began meeting at the Wagner Apartments located on Fairfax Street. In December of 1930, the church was able to bring on their first full-time pastor, Reverend George James and his wife Jeanette. It was under Pastor James' leadership that the church acquired their first church home at 316 King Street. The church grew so large that God asked them to step out in faith yet once again. In 1947, the church purchased property at 217 South Patrick Street. It was here that the church changed their name for the second time. They became known as Full Gospel Tabernacle Church. Shortly after they moved into their new building, Pastor James went to be with the Lord, and they called Reverend Obie L. Harrop of Hagerstown, Maryland, to be their second full-time pastor. It was under Pastor Harrop's leadership that the church began to flourish. New ministries were started, and lives were changed for the glory of God. In early 1952, efforts were begun to enlarge the church. The major reconstruction included removing the front of the church to attach an entirely new building to the auditorium, increasing their seating capacity to over 750 people. Within a few short years, however, the growing congregation realized that they still needed more room. The church eagerly sought the face of God, and in 1957, the church purchased an estate at 700 West Braddock Road. On June 3, 1963, the congregation dedicated the land to the Lord, believing it to be a lighthouse on a hill. It was at this point that the church changed their name for the 3rd time to First Assembly of God. Ministries began to grow and flourish as people listened to the voice of God. Since moving to the Braddock Road property, God has blessed us with 4 dynamic leaders. Pastor and Mrs. Obie Harrop, 23 years of faithful service. Pastor Lowell and Carol Harrop, serving 13 years, 7 as senior pastor. Pastor Tom and Bunny Gulbronson, 23 years. Pastor Wes and Stephanie Johnson, current lead pastors. Over the past 81 years, 9 properties, and 3 name changes, history has proved that First Assembly's congregation delights in hearing the voice of God.